The first light of dawn crawled across the dusty horizon, painting the barren hills of the Arizona frontier in shades of gold and ash. The wind carried with it the scent of sage and gunpowder, a scent that belonged to a land that never forgave weakness. The cowboy rode slowly, his hat pulled low, his revolver hanging loose at his side. His name was Elijah Boone, a man molded by hardship and haunted by silence. He had seen men hang, women weep, and good hearts rot beneath the sun. Yet that morning, when he stumbled upon the Apache camp ruined by soldiers' fire, something deep inside him stirred, a feeling he thought he'd buried long ago. The camp was nothing but ashes and bones. The cavalry had come through like a storm, burning, killing, taking prisoners. Among the wreckage, Elijah heard a faint sound, a low rasp of breath. He followed it and found her, an Apache woman bound to a fallen wagon wheel, wrists bleeding against rusted chains. Her eyes, though dimmed by exhaustion, burned with a defiance sharper than any blade. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him as if daring him to draw his gun. Elijah dismounted, kneeling beside her. "Easy now," he whispered, reaching for the chains. "I ain't one of them." But she spat in the dust and hissed, "You wear their boots. You smell like them." Her voice was cracked but proud, carrying the fire of a people who refused to kneel. Elijah paused, taking off his hat. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I don't belong to anyone. Not anymore." His knife flashed once, cutting through the metal links that held her. When the chains fell, she didn't collapse. She stood trembling yet proud, blood dripping down her wrists, and said through gritted teeth, "I'd rather die than be yours." The words struck him harder than any bullet. He stepped back, hands raised, his throat tight with guilt and awe. "Then die free," he said, voice heavy with something he couldn't name. "No man owns you." For a long moment they stood there in silence, the cowboy and the warrior woman, both broken by the same world, but standing on opposite sides of its cruelty. Her name was Tala, meaning wolf. Her people had been taken, her sister dragged away by the same soldiers. Elijah once rode with before he deserted the war that made him a ghost. He offered her water. She refused. He offered a horse. She glared at him like he'd offered poison. Yet when the echo of hoofbeats sounded from the east, the cavalry returning to finish their work, her resolve faltered. "They'll kill us both," Elijah warned. "You want vengeance, you need to live first." Something flickered in her eyes. She didn't speak, but she mounted the horse he led to her, her body swaying with weakness, yet fueled by a quiet rage. They rode hard across the plains, past ghost towns and shallow rivers, until the rising sun burned high enough to make the land shimmer. She rode ahead, saying nothing. He followed, knowing she trusted him no more than a rattlesnake, yet sensing that their fates were tied by something neither could escape. As the day wore on, Elijah began to see her differently, not as a captive woman or an enemy, but as a mirror of his own lost soul. He'd fled the army after seeing innocent people slaughtered in the name of peace. She had watched her people chained, her land stolen, her spirit tested. Two strangers, both unwanted by the world, now running from the same shadow. By sunset, they reached a small canyon where they could rest. The silence between them was heavy, but it was not hateful. It was the kind of silence that speaks of pain, too deep for words. When Elijah handed her a piece of dried meat, she finally looked at him and said, "You should not have cut my chains. They will come for you now?" He smiled faintly, his face rough with dust. "Let 'em," he said. "I've been running all my life." She studied him quietly, the hardness in her gaze softening for just a heartbeat. The wind howled between the rocks like a restless spirit, carrying away the smoke of yesterday's fire. And in that brief, fragile moment, Elijah Boone realized that dawn had not only freed her, it had also freed him. But freedom on the frontier always had a price. Night fell heavy and dark, the stars sharp against the black canvas of the sky. The fire between them crackled softly, casting orange light over their tired faces. Tala's wrists were bandaged now, wrapped in cloth Elijah had torn from his own shirt. She sat apart from him, eyes on the distant hills where the soldiers. Campfires glimmered like dying stars. "They will not stop," she said coldly. "They will hunt until the last." Apache breathes no more. Elijah stirred the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. Then we make sure they don't find us, he replied. But she shook her head. You do not understand, white man. Running is not living. Her words cut deep. He remembered the faces of his fallen comrades, the screams of children when towns burned, the hollow promises of men who claimed to bring law to the frontier. He looked at her, her silhouette fierce against the flames, and said quietly, Then tell me what living means to you. She met his eyes, and for the first time he saw the storm inside her, the loss, the courage, the longing for justice. It means standing where they tell me to kneel, she said. It means keeping my fire alive, even if I burn alone. At dawn, they heard the soldiers' bugles echoing across the valley. The cavalry had found their trail. Elijah tightened the saddle straps while Tala prepared her bow, her movements precise and calm. You can still leave, she told him, her voice like steel. They will not chase far if you ride north, he smirked, checking his revolver. I didn't cut your chains to let them put mine back on. She didn't reply, but her eyes glistened for the first time, not with fear, but with a strange respect. They took their stand near a narrow ridge, where the land narrowed into a choke point. The soldiers came in a thunder of hooves, rifles raised, banners snapping in the wind. Elijah fired first, his shots echoing like thunder, while Tala's arrows hissed through the air, striking true. Dust and smoke filled the canyon, the screams of horses mixing with the cries of dying men. For a moment, it was as if the earth itself raged against the cruelty of mankind. But the fight was hopeless. They were outnumbered. When Elijah took a bullet to the shoulder, he staggered but didn't fall. Tala rushed to him, dragging him behind a boulder. Go, he gasped, blood seeping through his shirt. You still have time. She shook her head fiercely. I will not run from death. She rose, bow drawn, eyes blazing like the sun, and shouted words in Apache, a cry that echoed through the valley like thunder. When her arrows were gone, she stood tall, facing the approaching soldiers with nothing but pride. Elijah raised his revolver one last time beside her, and together they fought until silence swallowed the canyon. When the smoke cleared, the sun was rising, soft, golden, merciful. The soldiers were gone, retreating with their dead, leaving only dust and silence. Elijah lay against the rock, pale and breathing shallowly. Tala knelt beside him, her hands trembling. He smiled faintly. Yes, we made our stand, he whispered. She touched his face gently, whispering, You were never my enemy, cowboy. He looked at her, eyes fading, and said, Didn't think I'd be anyone's hero. She shook her head softly. You were just a man who remembered what freedom means. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of desert flowers through the canyon. She closed his eyes, then turned toward the rising sun. The world was cruel, but she was alive, free. The words she had spoken that first morning, I'd rather die than be yours, were not a rejection of him but a vow to herself, to never kneel, to never let her spirit be broken. And as the horizon burned gold once more, the story of the cowboy and the Apache woman became another whispered legend of the frontier, a story of chains broken, blood spilled, and freedom reclaimed at dawn. If you were moved by this story of courage, freedom, and defiance, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like the video, and share it with friends who love tales of the Wild West. There's always another legend waiting to rise with the next dawn.